Welcome back, everyone. We get to finally talk about another Android phone today, and that specific phone is the Essential Phone 1. Now, when this phone first came out back in 2017, I think a lot of people were freaking out about it, not so much because of, the stock software behind it and everything, but more so of the design, and that's how I kind of actually saw it for the first time. I looked at this phone, and it looked like no other phone that I've seen before, and mind you, this was back in 2017, and in 2017 we had phones at this point in May. We had, the Galaxy S8 was out, which, trimmed down the bezels quite a bit. But this phone kind of showcased a different type of thing. If you remember like the Sharp Oculus phone, whatever that one was, where like it trimmed down the bezels all around, but it had that thick bezel at the bottom. This phone was really reminiscent about that. And you had that little notch up top, but other than that, you had a panel that was pretty good. It was a kind of strange resolution, 1312 by 2560 panel, but it was a 5.7 inch panel, which was pretty good. It wasn't like a massively crazy big phone, but it wasn't like a small phone either. It was like really good in the hand, and I think that's why a lot of people freaked out about it. The other main reason why this phone was so cool was the software updates. You know what I mean? Like, this thing got day one Android 10, as far as I think it was a little bit after, but around that time where Android 10 came out, the Essential Phone 1 officially got Android 10 that same day, which is super impressive, and that's something you can't knock this phone down for. And I actually think one of the main people who worked on Android back in the day actually stemmed out and made this phone company, which was really, really cool. So, they have some kind of, relationship with Google there, in terms of having some same developers. Now, unfortunately, as far as we know, the Essential Phone lineup is dead. There's no more, not only are there no more updates for the Essential Phone, but the Essential Phone 2 is never going to come, which is really sad because a lot of people actually like this phone, and rightfully so. It's a good phone. Now, like I said, looking on the front, you had that 5.71 inch IPS panel, and it was a pretty good one. I don't want to say, it was top tier and it was like rivaling OLED, which even at this time it wasn't, but it wasn't a bad panel. And really, the funny thing is that its main selling point was one of the things that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. That thick notch at the bottom, or that thick bezel on the bottom, that just kind of seemed so weird to me. It just looked so off. It was kind of funny. I mean, I would rather have that and the little notch up top than, not having anything at all and having thick bezels, but it was kind of funny, but it was good at the end of the day. You had a USB Type-C on the bottom, which was really, really cool. On the back, you had a dual camera setup, which is, pretty decent, in 2020, having a dual camera setup. You had that flash as well as that fingerprint sensor on the back as well, so you can just take your phone out, put your fingerprint on it, and be set. Now, there was no IP certification on this phone, which is kind of weird. Even in 2017 we had phones like the Galaxy S8, even like the Galaxy S7 that had IP certification, and this phone did not have it, which is really weird, but it's totally okay. You have to spend more money in order to get it anyway. The build quality of this phone was top tier. You had glass on the front, obviously, and you had glass on the back. So this phone felt very, very good in the hands for sure. It didn't feel like you had a cheap phone, even though this thing didn't cost that, $1,000. It cost a little bit less, which is really cool. Now, unfortunately, you can't really buy these things brand new anymore. And as far as I know, you can't even buy these things that while in used market. A lot of people aren't even selling theirs. And I was able to get my hands on it at a time where, Essential was still kind of up and running. But there are still some competitors to this phone, which I would recommend. Phones like the OnePlus 7 Pro, the OnePlus 7, OnePlus 6T. Those phones I would kind of recommend to people if you don't want to pick up this one. And I'll leave links to those in the description if you want to pick them up from there and help support the channel at the same time. But that pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. Now, hitting on the software, this was, like I said, one of the most important aspects about this phone. You started off with Android 7.1 Nougat. We were able to get Android 10.0 on it, which is super impressive. Phones like the Samsung Galaxy S8 that came out actually even earlier than this phone, by like a month or two, still didn't even get that Android 10 update from their manufacturer, which is so annoying. One UI 2 could have easily been supported for the Galaxy S8, but it is what it is. We're not going to talk about it in this video. But this phone ended up getting that Android 10 update, which is very, very impressive, and I have a lot of respect for Essential for doing that. And if we had more phone manufacturers out there pushing updates to these phones, that would be super, super impressive, and I would have a lot of respect for manufacturers for doing that. Unfortunately, the Essential Phone lineup is dead, so, we can't really go back and fix that. But for sure, at the end of the day, this phone, in terms of software, was good at the time, but since it's not getting software updates anymore, it's really not like a selling point of it, which is no big deal. I'm sure you can root this thing at custom ROM it, since it did have kind of a big following. I'm sure there's custom ROMs out for it. I wouldn't be surprised if, in a couple months, where Android 11 is officially out, even in a public beta form, maybe there'll be some updates for this thing. Who knows? Maybe they'll get a custom ROM out for this thing, probably, but but as of right now, it's still on par with the latest and greatest software that we have. Android 10 is the latest software, so you can't really knock it out there. So that's really pretty much it in terms of the software. Hitting on the performance, this thing has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and an Adreno 540 GPU. And you have the one model with 128 gigs of storage with 4 gigs of RAM. And what I can tell you about the performance of this phone is that thank God this thing is on stock Android. This thing does not really require too many resources in order for it to, fully go through, or it to fully download apps and maneuver through apps and all that stuff. What I will tell you though is that this phone is so in line with the Pixel phone that came out of this year. I think the phone of this year was the Pixel 2 and 2 XL. That phone had pretty much the same exact specs as this phone. It had the same exact amount of RAM as well, which isn't really that bad of a thing for stock Android. But when you have phones like, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 that could be spec'd out for 6 gigs of RAM and things like that, that could definitely mean that this phone could, be on the lower end of the software. But here's the other thing. The Samsung Galaxy S8 had 4 gigs of RAM too, so not that big of a deal. This phone, in terms of where it was at the time, isn't that bad. But now we have phones with like 8 gigs of RAM on that bottom tier model, which, this phone in 2020 doesn't really hold up too well in terms of that. But the performance is still pretty decent. If you're loading up random things, if you're texting people, calling people, Snapchatting, Instagram, those things won't really do too bad. But I think you get into a problem when you're constantly multitasking through all those different issues or different apps. You might find yourself running into some different problems here and there. Like I said, it's not an end-all be-all. It's not like if you're going to go and, open up Snapchat and then open up a game, then your phone's going to crash. It's nothing like that, but you will tend to see some, slowdown, some little chopped lagginess here and there. Again, not an end-all be-all, but it is something to consider at the end of the day. So if you're planning on getting this phone for basic uses, then I would say go for it. But if you're kind of getting this phone planning on gaming with it or anything, you should expect to see some lag here and there. You should expect to see some weird things going on. Again, not an end-all be-all, but it is something to consider at the end of the day. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it. I know it's kind of confusing. Basically, it's not the best performing phone nowadays, but if you're just doing basic tasks, then it'll probably get you from point A to point B. So that pretty much covers it up in the performance standpoint. Now hitting on the cameras, this thing, like I said before, has a dual camera setup on the back, a 13 megapixel lens with laser autofocus, and then another 13 megapixel lens with autofocus. I'm not really too sure what the other lens is for. Maybe it's a wide angle lens or something, who knows. But we have the ability to shoot 4K videos at 30 frames per second, which is very, very impressive. And in 2017, I'm sure that was the norm. We didn't really get 4K at 60 until, actually, we had 4K at 60 at that point. So, 4K at 30, that's really nothing too crazy. I thought this phone came out at 2015 for some reason, but 2017, yeah, that was pretty much the norm, 4K at 30. And this thing has a pretty okay camera. Again, not like the best thing ever. It's not gonna, wow anybody, but I'm sure you can get some good lighting and, take a pretty decent photo with this. So in terms of that, I think, it's pretty okay. This thing has an 8 megapixel camera on the front, and, you can do 4K video on that front camera too, which is actually pretty surprising. And I think in terms of both cameras, it's not going to wow anybody, but you do have the ability to take photos and take pretty decent photos at that. There's a lot of other apps in the Play Store actually that allow you to modify these photos really, really well, allow you to put filters in and all that stuff. So that's a huge selling point for the Essential phone. You have that vast library of apps in the Play Store that actually allow you to modify these photos, which is really, really awesome, besides things like Instagram or Snapchat. So that pretty much covers it up in the camera standpoint. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3040 milliamp hour battery, and it's not a bad battery life at all. I think it's okay, but again, you have to consider this phone has been out for a minute now. It's been out for a couple of years, so the battery has probably degraded. It's probably not at that full 3040 milliamp hour battery. It's probably at 2500 or something like that, depending on how well the person who you bought it from, or if you're buying it brand new somehow, how well they took care of that phone and took care of that battery and all that stuff. So I think overall it's not like a bad battery life for a stockish kind of Android phone, but I don't think it's going to wow anybody. Like I said before, when nowadays we have phones with over 4000 milliamp hour batteries, which is very, very impressive. So 3000 is kind of becoming the norm. It's kind of becoming the base model. If a phone comes out with below a 3000 milliamp hour battery, that's definitely not going to look so good. But I think for the time being, for kind of being a budget-ish kind of phone, it's really not that bad. So 3000 milliamp hours isn't really too bad for a phone like this. So to kind of sum up the video and to answer the question, is the Essential Phone 1 still worth it in 2020? What I will tell you is that I think this phone, if it's your only option, if you get a really, really good deal with it, then maybe it's still worth it in 2020. But I think for the majority of people, you'll probably be better off purchasing a phone like a OnePlus 6T or a OnePlus 7 or 7 Pro. I think those phones will probably end up doing you better. You're getting, almost the same type of software experience. I think Oxygen OS is a little bit better. You're getting tremendous build quality. You're getting a lot of cool features like that. But I think in terms of the software standpoint, you're getting very similar software between both phones. So I think you might be better off getting a OnePlus phone over the Essential phone. Those phones that I listed are still getting software support too. And those manufacturers still being supported and they're alive. So I would recommend those ones. But the Essential phone 1 still has a little bit of life left in it too. So that pretty much covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys would check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.